Jim Jarmusch interview, scene one, Mark.
So, hardest question of all, who are you?
Who am I? My name's Jim Jarmusch. I make films and music, and I write and do various other things. I'm a big fan of cinema of all forms, of course. Movies, films, whatever.
Okay, so for people who don't know, do you say Jonas Mekas or Mekas? And for what, yeah, that first.
Well, I've always heard both, but I've always said Jonas Mekas, but I'm not sure which is correct.
For people who don't know who he is, who was he to you?
Oh, wow. Well, he was a kind of instigator. He was someone I learned a lot from in so many ways about art and movies, and mostly about the possibilities of things. I love that Jonas, originally they would call these kind of films that he heralded underground films or avant-garde films, but in the end, I think Jonas preferred experimental films because it implied the idea of possibilities and of experiments and of nothing ever being set or necessarily attained. So yeah, he was just a big inspiration to me in so many ways. So busy all the time, the things he did as an archivist, the things he did as a filmmaker and an artist, things that he was interested in. I used to talk to him a lot about other forms, especially writing and poetry. And, just his kind of, his enthusiasm at discovering new things any day was just remarkable to me. So, yeah, big inspiration to me always. I consider myself, in a way, I know it's derogatory on some level, but I consider myself kind of a dilettante in that there are too many things in the world to just focus on one or two of them. So I take in things from many, many sources and forms and subjects, and that was also always kind of fueled and inspired also by Jonas.
I've heard you talk about being a self-proclaimed dilettante and why that's so important to filmmaking, and it reminds me so much of Jonas. Can you talk a little bit about why that's important?
For me, I'm maybe a little more formally aware than Jonas's work, but for me, cinema or movies, they contain, and I've said this a lot, they contain all the other forms of expression, writing and style and composition and photography and acting and music and movement, and all these things are within films. And Jonas, it was even wider than that because his interests were in all different ways that people express themselves. So there's something very interesting about where the art world and sort of the film industry is very blurred for Jonas, He was more interested in art and expression, and the financial side of things were a kind of annoyance to him, but he was always aware of them. There's a beautiful letter in one of the books of his collected writings and interviews, a letter that he wrote to the tax authorities in New York in the 50s, I think, that I love so much, asking for a tax break, But yeah, it was very wide, that kind of inspiration for him of coming from all different directions at all the and also he was very aware of having like antenna, of being a receptor. So he also always inspired me to appreciate all the details of things and not just look at the most obviously dramatic thing, but look at the details and, of course, the possibilities.
He often said in interviews, like one thing that was so special about the 50s and 60s was that money wasn't driving the creative, or it didn't seem to be as big of a part of the community. Do you think that that's changed today?
I don't know. As I get older, and I've done this for a long time now, I kind of step more and more aside from analyzing the market, but I have to rely on it so far still, annoyingly, to produce my films, So that is annoying, but I would say the marketeering factor is become more and more prominent. But I also think that, you know, planet Earth is in the midst of like the suicide machine of capitalism that I also talked with Jonas about over the years, you know. So that's something we can't control anymore as individuals because I don't know, the overlords have too much control and people are too much rewarded by money. But for Jonas, that was never, you know, he wasn't particularly a political fighter against that one thing of like, you know, the toxicity of capitalism, but he was obviously extremely aware of it, and he found his own kind of path aside from all that, what he considered nonsense mostly. He was more interested in humans and natural things and things that express things to you, that just the experience of being alive. I think Jonas really appreciated his consciousness so much, and other people too, and what they were doing. So there's that. And then also I've always been really inspired by artists like Jonas or Robert Frank, or people who don't look at a kind of, they're not looking for something that is their success. Like they're not interested in a kind of signpost that tells you what their work means. They're interested in the next thing they're going to do. So they're interested in the process, not the examples so much. And Jonas definitely was of that, you know, philosophy for sure.
Do you remember the first time you heard about him?
I went to Anthology Film Archives when it was on Worcester Street, that he and Kubelka, I guess, designed. So I never went previous to that. I don't think I was in New York when it was at the Joseph Papp. But I used to go a few times to Worcester Street. I lived way uptown at the time, but I came down and explored it a few times. And then from then on, you know, I was aware of Jonas writing in the Village Voice. And then I became a fan of Anthology Film Archives and just kind of followed it. And especially when it came here, it became really exciting to me that Jonas had really his own world now.
Do you remember reading those articles in The Voice? Like, do you remember the writing style or how it felt?
I remember a kind of exuberance for, you know, for Harry Smith and Jack Smith and Maya Deren. And, you know, I remember these things that were sort of treated as avant-garde, as sort of outside the mainstream. And I remember that kind of exuberance, I guess. That wasn't, you know, that was inspiring for sure.
At that point in the 70s, he had, there had already been like the Flaming Creatures case and sort of things like this that made him sort of, gave him a little bit of notoriety. Were you aware of those things? I heard you were a fan of Jack Smith.
I was aware of those things, and I was aware that Jonas had been in, you know, trouble with the law for Chant d'Amour and for Flaming Creatures. So that made him a kind of heroic, even though that was back in the 60s, I think. But I was aware of that, and you know, that kind of Jonas being also a criminal in a way made him even more kind of admirable to me. So yeah, he was always a kind of mythic figure in a way, but not mythic because he was there walking around and you could see him and find him and talk to him. So. But yeah, I liked very much that he fought against the authorities, you know.
You spent some time at the Cinémathèque in Paris at a point. In some ways, it's like Jonas's whole life was about creating spaces for these works to be seen. And I think we forget now how important that was at the time. So I wonder, was that really important and formative for you as a filmmaker, going to see works like that at places like the Cinémathèque?
Yeah, so much, because, you know, now we take for granted that we can, you know, I say sort of flippantly that my drug of choice recently is the Criterion Film Channel, you know. But people don't realize that back then if you were going to see a certain film by Jack Smith or by Jean Eustache or whoever, you would see when it was playing, like several months from now. You would mark that time. You would get your friends that were interested aware of this, and you would see that film on that date, because you didn't know if you would ever be able to see that film again, or if it would come back in 10 years, 5 years. So these things became events in a way for us. And so yeah, Jonas was like sort of he was the captain of a very important pirate ship, you know, which was Anthology, or all the things that he attracted. So he was kind of he was an important kind of pirate king to me. I also have referred to him as being the kind of poetic equivalent of a kung fu master too, because of his ability to take in, like I've studied some martial arts, and I do think maybe, and I once talked with Jonas about this, that maybe the secret of the universe is don't go against the grain. Like learn how things flow and don't have to hit against them, but although he did when it's necessary, you know, as a kind of fighter. But in general, the flow of energy and of life and expression, ideas, is something very mysterious and magical. But man, I just completely forgot what that train of thought was. I don't know where that came from.
Kung Fu Master.
Ah, Kung Fu Master. Jonas was very interested in the blending of forms always. You know, he didn't like categorizing things. So was he a diarist? Was he a documentary filmmaker? Was he an experimental filmmaker? Was he a poet of cinema, which is way overused? He was all those things. And calling him a poet is also important to me because it is a very overused thing, but Jonas was able to use the form of cinema in the way poets don't obey the laws of prose. They don't obey the laws or rules of certain literary structures. They are there to abstract them. So that, Jonas loved that, and he loved that in poetry, and he loved the idea that you could abstract and fragment language, and the language of images and sound could be also, those rules could be ignored, and you could find your own structure, like a poet, you know. So he really was very poetic with that form. And again, you know, it's a cliche to say that, but in his case, that kind of blending and bending of rules and disregard for categories, he was very energized about that, you know. I think his last book, A Dance with Fred Astaire, is a beautiful book too as a book because, yeah, okay, it's a physical object, it's a book. What is a book? So what is this book? And the other books of collecting Jonas's ideas are similar. There isn't a category really to define them because they're essays, they're interviews, there's images, there's photographs, there's poetry, there's drawings, there's things out of the newspaper, there is, you know, all of these things, it's open to all of them. So that, I love that book, but I have a lot of books of Jonas's. I love collecting all of his writings, the ones from the 50s and 60s. It's one of my current favorites. I like to just pick it up and read, okay, well, what did Jonas discuss with Pasolini or Susan Sontag or John and Yoko or, you know, so yeah.
The diary form is interesting because I think we've gotten so used to sort of the personal in film that we forget that it was radical at a point, you know, when people like him were discovering it. Did you ever talk to him about that or have any ideas or thoughts on his diaristic sensibilities?
Yeah, I never talked to him specifically about that I can remember, but, you know, now with kind of corporate overlords, the kind of documentary or even diary becomes something much more appreciated as being truthful in some way. I know film's not truthful in any way, really, but it's constructed. But it has changed very much how we see those things. And now even documentary films, I'm more interested in the ones that I would refer to more as essays than documentaries in a way, because that's also an open form. But it's true that there was, I wouldn't say revolutionary, but they were not, these kind of personal diary essay things were not really greatly appreciated, but certainly not by the mainstream.
In the beginning, he called them film poems. And maybe it's cliche to you, but I don't know. I wonder if you think that that's a good way to describe avant-garde cinema.
I think it depends on the creator, because style is so important in how people use things, Certainly in Jonas's case, that was appropriate, because he was really interested in poetry as a form, a literary form. But yeah, I don't know. I'm very bad with trying to put labels on things. I don't know. To me, that's all waves in the ocean that sometimes connect with other waves and then break apart. And when you start numbering and identifying the waves, it just gets too confusing to me. I just think it as an ocean of expression of humans, And movies is a huge, beautiful ocean and extremely varied.
You wouldn't say that there was a specific influence of the experimental film at the 50s and 60s on independent film in the 70s and 80s?
I don't know how to answer that. For me, I can only answer personally, and again, I have a very wide scope because I have been inspired by people like Jonas and poets that I studied with, like Kenneth Koch and David Shapiro, that are extremely important to me. Ron Padgett and Ann Waldman and friends of mine that are poets, So, yeah, I don't really know how to answer that. For me personally, I have a very wide scope, so I deeply love silent cinema from Hollywood and from around the world. I love classic Hollywood films, of course, but then I love experimental films from the US and Europe and all around the world. But I love the history of Japanese cinema and Iranian cinema and Indian cinema. So, it's hard for me to, I don't like the categories of like lowbrow, highbrow, this is academic, this is just mass audience pop culture. I don't care, if they are moving. I don't care if it's like a Shaw Brothers martial arts film or if it's a film of Kiarostami,
Were there any specific avant-garde films that you remember seeing early on?
Yes, I remember seeing a number of Michael Snow's films that I found very moving. And then I would see opposite films like Stan Brakhage, opposite stylistically. And the kind of range between them I found really kind of exciting, I think I found out about Maya Deren through Anthology and through Jonas way back in the late 70s, whose approach to filmmaking is very interesting to me. Jack Smith, I'm a big fan of Jack Smith. When I used to be in a band in the early 80s, he sometimes came to our shows, and I used to see him on the street, and one time he was gathering things in his baby carriage for possible theatrical props, and he gave me his business card, which I still have, which says Jack Smith, exotic theatrical genius, and then has his address and phone number. And I got Allen Ginsberg's business card. I got a few great business cards from these guys, like real businessmen, Jack Smith. But yeah, I just like the variety of expression. So yeah, it's hard for me to pinpoint certain films, really. But Wavelength, I believe, Michael Snow, it was so meditative and minimal that it was a kind of trance film for me. And I think at the time I saw it, I was discovering trance music from West Africa and Asia, and I don't know, somehow that really spoke to me. So it led me to look for more films of his, and then other people that maybe Jonas would program around them, and then I don't know, I was just kind of trying to absorb things.
Did you ever see any of Jonas's films?
Yes, I did. I mean, Walden was the first one that really moved me. You know, it was like, wow, this is like its own form completely. His film Lost, really affected me a lot when I saw it. It was like a big experience. But man, how many films did Jonas make even, you know? It's very hard to keep track of them. Outtakes from the Life of a Happy Man was a brilliant film of Jonas's. But I mean, there are too many things, I don't know.
In his work, he has this, he almost celebrates the mundane in this way that I find really profound. And I see that a little bit in your own work. Did you resonate with some of those themes?
Not in a conscious way, but most certainly, you know, they remind me of, you know, Neruda wrote a lot of poems like Ode to My Socks, or to very mundane, simple things. I remember reading many years ago in one of Jonas's like diaries, a little piece, and I don't remember where it was, but it was about putting on his shoes and looking down at them and thinking about the shoes and where they'd been, or before actually putting them on his feet and starting his day. So it was a very, very mundane thing about his shoes, you know? So this whole idea of appreciating details, that's very important to me. You know, I sort of started off talking in this little interview talking about Jonas's appreciation of details. So it's, you know, daily life is not dramatic or inherently hierarchical as to what are the priorities or what will happen to you in a day. So that all of those things, I don't know, Jonas just kind of represents a lot of those things for me.
I wonder if you have any insight, like there's a little bit of a melancholy in Jonas's writing and in his films, but in his life it seemed to be all joy. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I like in his work that there is a darkness sometimes and a melancholy, and then there's always some kind of humor. There's humor threaded through, and even a kind of appreciation of absurdity of daily life, you know? But yeah, no, I don't know, because the times I did get to hang out with Jonas were usually either I was seeking him out and seeing if I could hang out with him for a little while, or I would run into him and then try to stay with him for a while, and encouraged by him, you know. So yeah, come with me, I'm going to have wine, let's go now, you know. So they were like little incidents of, I don't know, inspiration for me. So, you know, I didn't really know what to talk to him about often. I'd just see what would happen.
Do you remember the first time like you actually got to sit down and hang out with him?
No, but I do remember a few times where it was I met him before this, he even had this, Anthology even had this building. But yeah, I got to talk to him once when he was with Robert Frank way back. But I remember a number of times I loved to come here and see if I could catch him and go downstairs and just hang out in the office or talk to him about new things in the archives. And I remember things he'd tell me like, oh, we found these Russian industrial films in the dumpster that I now want to catalog, like this excitement of like, what are they? Oh, they're footage of strange machinery in factories in the Soviet Union, you know, these kind of things. And we just found them, they've been thrown away, so we're seeing, should we include them in the archive, you know? And other, you know, recent films he was archiving was always interesting to me. But, you know, the tangents that he would go on, again, would maybe veer into the mundane or places you wouldn't expect. Like one thing that really made me love Jonas as a person was when remember when Britney Spears kind of went crazy and shaved her head and all that? And I don't know if anyone's talked about this, but Jonas made a very, definitive statement in defense of Britney Spears at this time. And Britney Spears, really, she represented mainstream culture completely. She was not avant-garde. Although now looking back, we see Britney Spears' importance in pop music and can be reevaluated in a way. But Jonas was like, look, this person is an artist. Whether you like their art or not, they have the pressure of what they create and express, and this person works very hard at it. And she is now being assaulted by everything around her, publicity and just the corporate media world. And that pressure has caused a kind of breakdown for her. And he said, I have only sympathy for her, I have only support for Britney Spears. And that seemed kind of antithetical, for Jonas at that time, the godfather of the avant-garde, sticking up for this mainstream pop icon. But it was a really good insight into him for me.
How did you end up, didn't you shoot a scene from Coffee and Cigarettes here at Anthology? I did, yes. The very first one I made was actually Saturday Night Live asked me, would you make a 5-minute film for Saturday Night Live to be shown in 5 minutes, no commercial break, no interruption? And I said, well, yeah, what do I need to know? And they said, well, 5 minutes and funny. And we like your style, so whatever you think, So my friends, Roberto Benigni from Italy was in New York at that time, and Stephen Wright was around, who's a friend. And I just thought, oh my God, let's see if I can get Stephen and Roberto, and we'll just make something up, and we'll shoot it. And then they were just preparing this building. It was in progress, they were redoing the whole interior. And I asked Jonas if I could maybe shoot there, or was it disruptive if we shot there? And he said, oh no, you can shoot here. I hope it's not disruptive that they'll be working around you, but we can quiet them down for when you shoot. So yeah, I got to shoot kind of on the landing of the staircase, I think it was, or maybe downstairs. I can't quite remember, but yeah, he let us shoot here, and we just kind of played around. We had a little kind of a script, and it was just playful, but it was really nice that I wasn't quite sure where to shoot, and Jonas right away said, oh yeah, shoot here, you can shoot here. That was 1986, maybe, I think 86. Then they ran it on Saturday Night Live, and then I thought, oh, I was shooting a film later in Memphis, Mystery Train. So I made a second one with Sankey and Joie Lee and Steve Buscemi. So we shot another one, and then I'd shoot another. I shot one with Tom Waits and Iggy Pop, and I just started sort of collecting them for a while. But that was the first one, yeah. Why is Anthology important as an institution? Well, it's getting more and more rare to go and see interesting films that aren't mainstream films we've been losing venues now. And Anthology is important because in a way it's the most protective of the films, of the world of filmmaking that, how do I say this, that isn't really important to the film industry, And there are other venues that mix things and that I really appreciate, and I love the Film Forum, and I love Metrograph, and I love, mixing European film and so-called art films with appreciating commercial films that are artistic or interesting on whatever level. But Anthology's the kind of, I don't like to use the word pure exactly, but it's the most protective, I think, of the
the more fragile kind of films. And they're not fragile in and of themselves. Some are extremely powerful. But their existence is fragile, you know, and it's why Jonas wanting to archive things was so important. So Anthology is very particular, and it's not just particular in New York, it's kind of particular in the world. So yeah, it's a really important place for me. I'm hoping for the cafe, you know, that Jonas wanted to have here, because I kept telling him, that's going to be my hangout, Jonas. You're not going to get rid of me. I'm just going to come there every day. So I know that was important to him, to have a kind of a little cafe, sort of social spot, because Anthology also, and this sounds kind of cliched, but it's also a kind of a community, you know? So, because the people that have worked here over the years and people who come here, I think they all like appreciate each other because it's for the appreciation of this part of filmmaking. And yeah, it's pretty unusual, really. For sure, although I have enough trouble just trying to get the money and the time and the energy to make them. So, but yeah, it's very important to me. And I'm pretty aware, and I've made trips. Years and years ago, I went to Rochester to the Eastman House because they invited me to speak to the graduating class of film preservation students, right? So I went there and they showed me where they worked and the preservation facilities, and it was really great. But there were only like 8 students that I spoke to, and rather than speaking to them, I just was very interested in what they did and encouraging, and then I said, how would you like to celebrate your graduating? They said, we'd like to go with you to our favorite dive bar in Rochester and hang out tonight. So that's sort of what we did as the, you know, graduating ceremony. But I really appreciated them and their work, and I thought it was so cool because when we went into the facility where they worked, we put on white lab coats and everything. It was just, I don't know, they were really fantastic people. So yeah, preserving these forms, which now are becoming obsolete, you know, and very, very fragile physically, film materials and how to preserve them. It's a big kind of problem. It's something that is being addressed by a lot of amazing people.
We interviewed Peter Bogdanovich a couple weeks ago, and he was telling us about so many of the pieces of his early works that had already been lost, even some elements of Mask. Have you had any of those issues with any of your work? Or?
No, and I've been very, very careful, and all my films go to the Academy Archives in Los Angeles now. I love the Eastman House as well, and I almost put them there. But the Academy Film Archives is incredible, and they didn't make me sign anything that my films are there in perpetuity. They're like, well, you can sign on with us and have us preserve them, but you can remove them in the future if you so choose, or move them somewhere else, which was not the case at other archives for me. So I like that. So yeah, and they're really, really great out there too. So all the film preservation people are really admirable to me.
I mean, I guess the thing that I try to understand about Jonas is that it's so rare for somebody who's also an artist to be so good at building a community as well and dealing with all of these huge personalities. Like, we have this interview with Ginsberg where he really talks about Jonas just being able to like be this social center in this world of huge personalities, and it was almost like magic, you know. And I wonder if you have any insight into that sort of rare aspect of who Jonas was. Well,
you see it in his work and all the people that he attracted or was attracted to their work, you know. It's just incredible. I just, you know, I don't know. I remember being once with Robert Frank and running into, this is like, sounds so name-dropping historically, but being with Robert and then running into Harry Smith and then running into Jonas, who then just was talking to them about so many exciting things, but the idea of those two guys, and like, oh, there's Jonas and here's Jonas, and then the energy level just started elevating, you know? And later I went home and thought, oh my God, I was just with Robert Frank, Harry Smith, and Jonas Mekas, you know? But to Jonas, it was like, oh, here's some cohorts that I'm interested in always, and blah, 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 you know, talking up a storm to them.
I think Harry lived here for a while.
Once when Harry got thrown out after the Chelsea and he was living in some hotel in Brooklyn, he had to move out, he was being thrown out, and he had a lot of his work too. And I ran into Robert Frank on the street, and Robert's like, okay, Jim, what are you doing right now? Nothing really, I don't know, I was gonna go over there, blah, blah, blah. And he said, come with me, we gotta help Harry Smith, we gotta help him move his stuff in Brooklyn. Is that okay? And I was like, sure. And then Robert and I were over there, you know, unloading his apartment and putting stuff in some rented van for Harry Smith, you know. But these people, you know, they weren't full of themselves. They didn't think of themselves in self-important ways. Of course, they were protective of their work and valued it, you know, and valued each other's work. But I just loved how kind of offhand they were, like, you know, they were real bohemian people, you know, not interested in the square world, was not of importance to them. So that was a big, you know, inspiration for me when I was younger, for sure.
I've heard you say that you are an amateur. What do you mean?
I don't like being thought of as a professional at whatever I do, you know, because to me, professional means you do this to earn your living, you know, which I try to do, of course, but that's not my intention. So I just feel more comfortable because the root of the word amateur means the love of a form, and professional implies the financial aspect of it. So I just like to think of myself as a lover of these forms rather than, and my approach is probably not very professional in a lot of ways as well. I'm very much intuitive, and I rely on my intuition more than my sense of analysis. And when, you know, you're working with people whose money you're using, they like to have all of that stuff analyzed in advance, you know? And I'm not good at that. Even on my own films, the production is my own production, but even the production side will ask us, with good reason, how many setups do you plan to do today? And my kind of arrogant answer is usually, we'll tell you at the end of the day. Because I don't like to have these plans put on the work. I don't know. I might decide I want to shoot this scene in one setup, and so I'm going to work on that all morning. Or I might decide, yeah, I need 6 setups in the next hour, and then we're going to do that, you know? But I don't always know the day before exactly, so I don't know. It's also a little protective to be amateurish, because then you can have, it implies in a way a little bit of maybe rough edges or coloring outside the lines in a way, so I don't know.
That improvisational style really reminds me of, you know, a lot of those early filmmakers and like Cassavetes and stuff. But you're saying he can't be categorized, like we can't say, yes, they were experimental filmmakers.
You mean Cassavetes
Yeah.
particularly? Well, he's hard to categorize. He found his own way, you know. And what drove Cassavetes was what's the intention, what is the message of the film first, and then the style, you know. And often when we make films without a lot of money, the style is almost determined by limitations, you know. And Jonas knew that. He loved the idea of limitations. And so those things are very important to me. And I learned a lot from Robbie Mueller, the great cinematographer that I worked with for quite a few years, who always said, okay, it's good to have a shot list for us and an idea of how we're going to approach it, but the hour on which we go to shoot everything may be different. The light, the source of the light, the sun, whatever. So we must always be adaptable and thinking on our feet about how to find, how to photograph the thing we're trying to gather to make a story, a film out of. So yeah, I'm not real rigorous I'm more rigorous in being attuned to intuition than to the sticking to the plan particularly. But I'm not an experimental filmmaker. I make narrative films. I just kind of like to have the rules not be too imposing on me and find my own way. And I love style. So, Cassavetes, people like Scorsese, Kiarostami, all of these people have their own styles in a way. Claire Denis, you can sort of, even if they're not a signature, you feel their approach to the form.
Do you remember the last time you talked to Jonas?
I think it was the last time we did, I think I saw him once after the time we did this little interview around the corner here. And then I saw him once after that here. And I went downstairs and hung out in the office for a while. That was the last time that I got to see him. I thought he was one of those guys that was going to just keep doing what he did until his body just stopped allowing him to, I was a little surprised, oddly, when we lost him, because I just thought, yeah, Jonas, he's going for the record. He's going to be 110, But I knew he wasn't because, your body wears out. But honestly, I never really thought much about losing him. That's why when he left, it was a bit of a shock, You're never really ready for it. Losing Robert Frank, and his health wasn't good for a while, but still it was a hit because you just want them to still be there. They're just so important that they're out there doing things. I remember, this journalist from Chicago, Studs Terkel, he died after he finished the promotion of his last book, and I think he was around Jonas's age, mid to late 90s. And I remember an interview toward the end of his life, and they said, man, you're getting up there, you're traveling around doing this book tour. How, do you think about your mortality? And he said, well, I just got to finish this tour. That's all I'm thinking about. I can't go until I finish this job here. And then who knows? I don't know. I'm old. And then he finished the tour and then he died. But he had that thing he had to do, And I don't think Jonas quite wanted to leave yet because I think he really was really excited about Anthology Film Archives and, making it what he wanted it to finally be.
For an audience who, is there any final big lessons or that you took away from Jonas's life and influence that would be important to convey to an audience?
Well, man, I think we've been talking about them this whole interview. I think it's like follow your instincts and appreciate the details and be a fan as well as an artist, because Jonas was a big fan of everybody, But I don't know how to sum that. I'm not good at that kind of thing. But I did think the other day of Jonas, and images of Jonas with a Bolex camera reminded me, I don't know, in the moment of Woody Guthrie's guitar that he had written on "This Machine Kills Fascists" or whatever. But that guitar was his weapon in a way, or his way of delivering things. And Jonas's Bolex was equally iconic to me in a funny way. So, this machine destroys preconceptions of what is filmmaking. I don't know. Just put it in Jonas's hands and see what he does.
When you transitioned to video, did you talk to him about easily making that transition ever?
No, but I talked to him once about visiting Chris Marker outside of Paris, because once I got to visit Chris Marker in a small editing room that had been paid for by a French producer for Chris Marker. And I went in there, and Chris Marker was very nice to me. He had liked the films I'd made up to that point, and he was editing on video, but he had a bin with a lot of, this is kind of a long story, but he had a bin with a lot of trims from film, but in it was a cat, a mother cat with her kittens in the bin. And he said, yes, well, you know, I love cats, and she just had babies, and I will not disturb that bin of film material. But it doesn't really matter because I've been working a lot in video lately. But I want to finish this film once she takes her babies out of there, but I'm not going to disturb her. And go ahead, peek in. And I looked in. There's a mother cat with her kittens, you know. And Chris Marker was working on video, and he said, well, it's just another tool. It's just, is it a pen or is it a pencil? I don't know. I'm just going to make stuff now with video for now. And I have a good excuse, because the cat. And I related this story. Jonas loved that story. You know, he said something about, yes, we must always have priorities. You know, about Chris Marker, like, well, the cat is deciding for me that I'm going to pick up the pen instead of the pencil. But I didn't talk to Jonas about his specific feelings himself about these different forms. They're just tools, you know. People used to say when photography was invented, they wrote that the idea of painting is dead forever, because painting had been representational, you know. But now we can take a picture, so we don't need painters. And, you know, it's absurd. The tools remain, and they're always beautiful, depending on how they're used.
I think that really covers it for me. Do you have anything that I didn't cover?
Oh yeah, one thing that I think is important about Jonas is, you know, I guess the word displacement is interesting to me because of his whole personal history and being displaced and coming from Lithuania and all the things he and his brother went through and all the things. And I think that was something valuable, and in a way, I don't know if it was analyzed by Jonas much, but that sense of displacement informs a lot about his films, about his relations with people, about what were his priorities in terms of human expression. So it's something really interesting to me. And there's a very early poem by John Ashbery where there's a line about all beauty, resonance, and integrity exist by deprivation or logic of strange position. And I recently was rereading that poem, and for some reason I thought of Jonas, because I thought of, you know, exist by deprivation or logic of strange position. And it seemed like a beautiful way of sort of describing how Jonas approached filmmaking, you know? Because deprivation, okay, we don't have all this money, we don't have this isn't like a Hollywood movie shoot, I have a Bolex, you know? And also being, you know, having a sort of strange position, being an immigrant, having what he went through, and being someone so well-read and educated pretty much on his own. And the fact that he wasn't always spouting things, he was also observing and listening to them. So, yeah, I appreciate the logic of strange position of Jonas somehow. I don't know what that means, but that hit me the other day when I was rereading the first book of poems of John Ashbery.
Love of cinema. Just why is it important?
Well, it's the closest thing humans create to dreams, you know? And this, you know, Jonas is not wanting to differentiate between memory and dream and diary, recollection and imagination. You know, he loved these blurring of these things. He found, within that blurring, he found really something powerful. So, And I got to say, I love when I read things Jonas writes. I love whenever he uses the word camera. For some reason, I'm attracted to when he mentions a camera, which is just a physical machine, a device. But he'll say, we will speak through our cameras. He will give the camera some kind of importance, which I love. I love a quote of one of my favorite American Hollywood filmmakers, Sam Fuller, said, what did he say? He said, he referred to the camera as being his typewriter. Like, I write with the camera. And Jonas too, I love his sort of reverence for this machine that can capture things and change the way we look at the world, at the details around us.